You're live.
All right, everyone, welcome back to episode 2 of the Rolling Thunder MMA podcast. Following on from 324 over the weekend, we had Paddy Pimblett taking on Justin Gaethje. What a card, man! Honestly, it action packed from top to bottom. I myself watched from pretty much the first fight onwards, and wow, what a card, Carl! What are your sort of initial thoughts on the card?
Mate, absolute fireworks. There was a couple of fights early on in the prelims and, getting into the start of the card that was slightly disappointing, but I think that main event delivered in true Justin Gaethje fashion. And to be honest with you, Paddy's stock's gone up as well. I think a lot of
Mm.
people were either riding the train or hoping he loses. And what a chin. Wow. Max Holloway might have a bit of competition for getting dropped there. Honestly, I thought he was going to potentially get finished in that first or second. As per my prediction last week, I said Gaethje's
Mm.
got probably 2 to 2.5 rounds in him, especially with that staff. You could see the skin patch on his neck in the weigh-ins and as he walked to the cage, and didn't he deliver? Wow. What were your thoughts on the fight, mate?
Yeah, I thought it was absolutely incredible. Like you said, you can't count out Justin Gaethje, which was in the back of my mind before the fight. There was obviously a lot of hype surrounding Paddy Pimblett coming into this, and although he lost, I do think that he's retained a bit of stock because what heart that took. I
Mm.
mean, I think if you put anyone else from the top 10 in that division in there, and they're copping some of those shots, bar Max Holloway, I think they're going to sleep. So you got to give credit where credit is due. It was an incredible
Scousers
fight.
don't get knocked out.
They don't. They really don't. I mean, unless you put Taporia in front of them, in which case I think he gets flatlined.
Yeah,
But
that's we can save that for later. We'll get into that,
we
but
absolutely, we
definitely.
absolutely can. But yeah, what a card to kick off the year. What a main event to kick off the year. I genuinely think that's one of the greatest fights of all time.
I
I
couldn't agree
think,
more.
yeah, that's up there. Like in terms of the pure violence, that's Dustin Poirier, Dan Hooker. I think that
Mm.
this was more entertaining than that fight, and that was a 5 round war. Obviously higher stakes, but
Mm.
this was an incredible fight nonetheless. What a way to kick off the Paramount deal, which that's another thing that we can talk about as well. Was
Yep,
the production of the card, which I think everyone has a fair bit to say, but
definitely.
I think that this fight kind of put a lot of things into perspective for both fighters. Obviously you got the number 4 and number 5 who fought for the interim. We've now got Justin Gaethje versus Taporia, probably at the White House. That's probably what's going to happen now. You've got Max and Charles in March, and then probably Armin fighting the winner of that fight. I think that's how the division's going to get lined up. But it's going to be very interesting to see because Justin did say he wants some time off. Ilya's not coming back until that June, July mark. So it's going to be very interesting to see. But it was pure domination from Justin. Paddy had some moments. He
Mm.
was stinging Justin on the feet. He was gaining some momentum in round 3, but he just couldn't bounce back fully. I think that Justin showed that there's levels, especially with the striking. Paddy didn't go to his grappling, which surprised me. I think he wanted to prove he could stand and bang, which if you look at his face in our
Mm.
backgrounds, he couldn't stand and bang.
Do you
You know,
think he didn't go to the grappling because he chose to? I mean, I think initially maybe he chose to stand and bang, but Justin put such great pressure on him and had him moving backwards. As you know, it's very difficult to shoot good quality takedowns when you're moving backwards, especially with the damage he was incurring.
mm,
I don't think he had the opportunity to really enforce the grappling. Justin, it was one of the experience really showed. He's getting to the
mm,
that 40 years of age mark, and he just had him on the back foot. His grappling was a lot better. It was safe. It wasn't, he had him in that sort of front headlock position. Had that have been a Charles Oliveira, an Arman Sarukian, an Ilia Topuria, definitely an Islam Makhachev, you're going to sleep. Justin
yeah,
didn't use that. He used that to consolidate the position, get a bit of ground and pound in there, which he said in his post-fight interview that he really enjoyed getting some great ground and pound off, which he did. You could see the damage on Paddy's face. But yeah, I think he just really showed experience and didn't allow Paddy the opportunities to grapple. His takedown
mm,
defense all through the 5 rounds was fantastic, that's been shown in other fights as well, even against the likes of Khabib and not so much Charles Oliveira, but Khabib struggled to get him round for a couple of rounds until he eventually did get that finish, which is inevitable against the great Nurmagomedov. But Yeah, I think he really showed his experience and his class, and he's an underrated defensive wrestler. So yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. He went to that signature Gaethje headlock. As you said, he wanted to use that to his advantage because in his post-fight interview, he said, they can't submit you from there. They can't really do much from there except try and build a base. So it was a great game plan from Justin. I think if Paddy went to the grappling a bit earlier when they were a bit more dry, but again, as you said, he was on the back foot, when he was up against the cage and he got dropped and, almost got stopped. I think one thing that we do have to sort of address is the eye pokes in this fight. You know,
definitely.
Paddy got eye poked pretty bad, and I was thinking that we were having a repeat of Aspinall Cyril Gane. I don't know what it is
Mm.
about these English guys in title fights, but they love getting eye poked.
It just
And
goes.
the
Yep.
first
No, you keep
one,
going.
yeah, the first one was there. Obviously Justin apologized. Probably wasn't intentional, but then you had Mark Goddard say, "If you do it again, I'm going to take a point."
Mm.
Right? And then you get to that. I believe it was the end of round three, and he got him with the thumb, which is when
Mm.
his pupil went smaller, and that's when he got cracked and then
Mm.
dropped. And we didn't see that until after the end of the round. So that point deduction never happened. I'm not saying
Definitely.
that Paddy would have won because I think round two could have been classed as a 10-8
No,
because
definitely.
he really did get dominated
Dominated,
for that round.
dominated. Agreed. And I
But
went back
there,
and I
yeah.
watched a bit of, sorry to interrupt you there, just on that point of eye pokes, but I went back and I watched a couple of Justin Gaethje's fights there, and I saw one of his first fight against Dustin Poirier. It's very similar. He's, striking with those exposed fingers.
Mm,
Tony Ferguson, in very similar fashion, the thumb went into the left eye, and like you said, it's where they're compromised and they're waiting for that ref to step in and see their reaction. They're then getting cracked. Dustin Poirier in the
yeah.
first fight, he got hit with some lethal leg kicks. Obviously, he ended up winning that by knockout, but it just, what damage are they taking that then they're
Mm.
not going to recover from fully after that? Like you said, it's an integral moment of the fight. Do I think it changes the outcome on this one? No, I don't. But who knows? Because, like you said, Paddy then took so much damage that he was on the back foot trying to win the next 3 rounds, which he obviously couldn't do. He had his moments where he did rock Gaethje, but yeah, the eye pokes need to be stopped. And going back to what you said, sorry to interrupt you about the Aspinall situation with Garn, something needs to be done about the gloves. It's the talk of the town
Yeah.
across multiple fights. How many fight cards have you watched recently where there hasn't been at least 1 to 2 eye pokes? There's almost
I
none.
can't recall.
You
And I've
can't
and I've, and
recall.
I've been watching the fight nights as well.
you
Happens on
know,
the fight nights as well. Happens
religiously.
everywhere. And look, I can understand it in MMA gloves, as someone who does boxing, when you're measuring distance, you typically will have your palm open, which means your fingers are exposed.
Mm.
But if you look at Trevor Whitman's brand, ONX, the gloves that he makes, I know they were in talks to do a deal with the UFC. That ended up falling through, but the gloves that they make have the rounded ends.
Mm.
So you can't actually, get your fingers in anyone's eyes. And people could say, oh, well, that changes how the gloves impact the grappling. But these are tried and tested. These are on the market
Mm.
that people are using. I think
Yeah,
that there are solutions. I also think that the reffing needs to be tighter. I
definitely.
was happy when I saw that first warning from Goddard, but then nothing else. So
Do you think
it
they're
should be.
scared it's the first Paramount deal? They don't want the crowd erupting or potentially some pressure from Paramount to not take a point and ruin the main event? Or,
Well, potentially, but I think there was already enough that could have upset Paramount with some of the
mm,
post-fight speeches on the prelims. Mister
mm.
Mister Josh Hockett, that was a that was an entertaining post-fight conference.
He's a
It was
unique individual.
the second coming of Chael Sonnen, I think, is Mister Josh Hockett in the heavyweight division. But
Mm.
getting off track, um, yeah, I think that there just needs to be tighter reffing. Like you look at Adesanya when he fought Imavov, who's another teammate of Cyril Gane, who is notorious for dirty fighting. And
Mm.
Izzy got eye poked, and then they reset, and then he got knocked out.
Definitely.
You look at Waldo Cortez Acosta's second last fight before he fought Shamil Gaziv. That's exactly what happened when he fought Ante Delija.
Mm.
Eye poke and then knockout.
Definitely.
In the opposite way. Like he got TKO'd, but because he got eye poked, they started the fight again, and then he
100%.
got the knockout.
I think
So
if the UFC, like you said, they're not going to invest in those Onyx gloves or something similar, it's got to be everyone's across the board in the back. They're addressing the fighters. If you eye poke, accidental or not, it has the capacity to really change how the fight goes. It's an immediate point. And that way,
Yeah,
we're not the only podcast or any people analyzing it and talking about it. They're going to change pretty quick because it's going to be that thought that goes, instead of coming in like this, I'm going to come in like this. And
yeah,
therefore, you're not making any changes to the gloves for the grappling side of it. Realistically, majority of the roster are strikers. The UFC loves their exciting fighters. You've got your amazing grapplers that are exciting as well. But if they're going to keep the gloves the same, which they've sort of proven that that's what they're likely to do, I just think it's got to be an immediate point. But anyway, we'll move on
yeah.
because otherwise we'll run out of time. But from
We will.
here, where do you see Paddy going? What's next for him?
He needs to really, really assess what went wrong in this fight. I
Mm,
think, he does have that grappling base, but I really think that he needs to spend some time with a proper boxing coach because the jab was working for him somehow. He threw it from all sorts of positions. He wasn't throwing a traditional jab where you've got the elbow tucked in, you're throwing it from around your face. He was sort of having his hands low, which is why he kept getting stung by Justin because he comes in fast, explosive with those overhands, with
mm,
those hooks from the clinch and even at middle range. So, Paddy's got seasoned grappling. He's a very good grappler. He's a dynamic striker in that when he does hurt someone, he can get the finish with just blazing straight at him, throwing him into a firefight. But I think he needs to get his fundamentals with his striking right because that's really where he let himself down in this fight. He was
mm.
landing on Justin, and if he was throwing with proper technique, I think he could have finished Justin. And the perfect example of that is Max Holloway.
Yep.
And, look at what happened in their fight. He outclassed Justin for 5 rounds. And the unfortunate part is now Justin has to face the man who just knocked out Max Holloway not too long ago, which is Ilya Topuria, who I think is the best boxer in the entirety of the roster. So if Paddy
Mm.
does really want to fight the little sausage, then he better get some good striking behind him before he even thinks about that fight. I think he needs to rebuild himself, take some time off. He's obviously extremely injured, straight to the hospital after the fight, but he needs to go with his coaches. There's plenty of boxing talent in the UK. There is an extraordinary amount. It's one of the
Mm.
pinnacles of the sport. The likes of Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua. You got plenty of people over there. I think that's the next step for him. He needs to rebuild himself. He needs a couple fights before he's even in title contention again. If Dan Hooker wins this weekend, there's a bad blood matchup right there. Put it on a co-main. Put it on the main card of another
Fight
numbered
night
event. Make it
or a numbered
make it the
event.
main
Yeah.
event of a fight night. That's a great fight.
I
Even if
couldn't
Dan
agree with you
loses,
more.
make that fight.
I think
Give the
so.
fans what they want to see, and we want to
Definitely.
see him fight. Let's see if his grappling really is that bad.
No, I
You know,
agree. I agree. I think it's a great fight for both men, and that was what I was going to suggest. If you throw Paddy in there with the likes of, the only other option would be the loser of Holloway and Oliveira. That way you're going
Mm,
to go, look, you've had two opportunities at top flight competition. Obviously, a lot of people have the opinion that maybe Paddy's been accelerated through the rankings unjustly. If he gets through one of them, he belongs, and if he doesn't, then he has to fight back down, and he has to climb the rankings the correct way, and he's not being gifted like the Dana White privilege that he potentially got. But anyway, we'll move on to the co-main. So
mm.
thoughts on Song Yadong, Sean O'Malley, Sean back in the win column.
I don't know why this was such a controversial fight. I saw a lot of people saying that Song Yudong got robbed, and I think I missed the memo on that one. For me, it was very, very clear that Sean won rounds 1 and 3. Was it the most entertaining fight? No, it was not a vintage Sugar Show performance, but the fight went pretty much exactly how I predicted. Sean was on the outside at long, picking away at Song with leg kicks and body kicks, using his
Mm,
crisp counter striking on the way in because all Song was trying to do was be explosive.
yep.
He had a couple moments. He got a takedown late in round one. He got one sort of halfway through round two. Sean did get back up to his feet. And then obviously we had Sean landing that big flush knee on the chin of Song
Signature,
Yadong in
like he
round
did
three,
against Vera.
like he
Similar.
did against Cheeto. Exactly right. And it was, man, it was beautiful. But yeah, I mean, there's really not much else you can say. It was a point fighting win.
Definitely.
I think it showed that he's going to struggle in a fight with Umar. He doesn't
Mm,
deserve a trilogy with Marab. And if you put him in 5 rounds against Petr Yan, I think that that's a very different outcome to their first fight.
mm.
Whether the UFC decides to give that immediate rematch to Marab, I'm not too sure. But
I
I
think
think,
Marab went on an interview the other day and he's announced the UFC has approached him that for the immediate rematch, but it's not going to be at the
right.
White House.
Mm,
So yeah,
okay. Might be
that's
sooner.
interesting. And you know what? I really think across the UFC, but definitely in that bantamweight division, and after Sean's performance, I think Sean and Umar had an opportunity to potentially jump. More so Sean than Umar, but both of them didn't deliver to the spectacle that they can.
Yeah.
Definitely Sean, he's the sugar show. He puts on a show. He delivers fantastic knockouts. He wanted a win. He's come off two losses from Arab. He needed a win to stay relevant and to stay in the win column. Song Yadong, fantastic fighter, top five gatekeeper in my opinion. I don't
Yeah.
know, whilst this top flight competition, call them the old guard, even though they're all still pretty young. You've got Petr Yan, I believe he's 32, and Marab, he's not too old either. Whilst they're around, I just don't see him getting into the top three into that championship
Yeah.
contender. But from here, what do you see for Sean? What's next? Not a,
Honestly,
mm,
the fight I want to see is Corey Sandhagen and Sean O'Malley. I think, Sandhagen did put up a great performance against Marab. It was obviously not a Petr Yan performance, but
mm,
I think that, in all of the people who have fought Marab, I think probably the most impressive performances, bar Petr Yan, who beat him, but in the people that lost to him last year, I think it's Umar and Corey, who've obviously shared the octagon together as well. I think Sean needs another one. You know, Umar as well. He fought the likes of Mario Bautista, and he's now beat Figueiredo, but he didn't really beat them in the impressive fashion that he needed to. If he went out there and finished Batista, finished Figgy, or just wiped the floor with them, I think that that could have been an argument for bumping him up in
mm,
terms of getting a title shot. But like you said, Figgy, 38 years old, he's really not the Figgy of old, right?
nah,
And Umar still just kind of made it look like it wasn't competitive. Definitely was not a close fight, but it also was really not that next level. That should have been like a Makachev versus Moicano. That's the
definitely,
level of domination
definitely.
that you need to be putting yourself back in title contention.
Yeah.
So, whether they make
Mm.
Sean and Umar fight next,
Sean
I
doesn't want
think
that fight.
that's a fight that Sean loses. Let's be real. The grappling, he just doesn't have that level of
Mm.
counter wrestling.
I
Like
think the
you look at Justin
difference.
Gaethje,
There you go. You
he doesn't
continue.
have that level of wrestling. He doesn't have the wrestling pedigree that some of these other guys do, these Americans. You look at how many of them started in wrestling and then they made their way over to combat and to MMA.
Mm.
They may be strikers, but they have a grappling background, whereas Sean does not. So he can't really hang with the likes of Petr Yan, Marab, or Umar, who are the
Mm.
top three in the division. So I think it's going to be difficult for him. And honestly, I think he does need to go to Dagestan for a little while and roll with the brothers over
Mm.
there.
Big Papa
Maybe
Cup.
maybe get in the Team Habib camp and and then
Yeah.
obviously Umar him in. No jacuzzi for him, but I think that's what he needs. He needs a better wrestling pedigree and some grappling lessons for sure.
I like Sean in the sense that against the competition he's fought, he uses that omoplata to stand up, if you've noticed that. But
Mm,
I agree with you. I think Marab and Umar are very different fighters, especially in the wrestling department. Marab's going to take you down a million times. Umar, and we saw it on the weekend with Figgy. Figgy obviously likes to play bottom position, but he just couldn't get up. And unless you're a top flight wrestler, like you just mentioned, Sandhagen had some success, but he's very good all round. You're not getting up. Sean's probably going to struggle to get up from that position. We could have a repeat of McGregor versus Khabib too, but yeah, from here, I think you book potentially Sean versus Sandhagen. Both Sandhagen's coming off a loss, but not nothing really lost. He just got Marabed, I guess you could say. Sean lost in very
yeah.
similar fashion, to be honest with you, and Sandhagen didn't get finished. He just got dominated. I think you book that fight for. I actually don't mind Song Yadong versus Umar. Song, unfortunately for him, is he's going to
Yeah,
have to take some tough fights because he is so good that he's not getting dominated, but he's just not ending up with the W and the win to move forward onto those
yeah.
high-ranked opponents. Umar was gifted an early title shot against Merab. It was a very close fight, but he didn't win at the end of the day, and you've got to take that L and you've got to move forward. He's beat some lower ranked opponents, like you just said. Batista's fantastic, but he's still ranked eighth. Figgy, I think where was he ranked on the weekend? I have to just double check.
Sixth.
Sixth, So yeah, I think you give Song Yudong, you let them both, they both fought on the same card. You give them the equal amount of time to rest up. Song's probably going to need a bit longer for his nose, but yeah. Anyway, what do you think of Derek Lewis's performance? Was questionable on the weekend.
I think he might have put a bet on Waldo, to be honest. That was one of the worst heavyweight fights that I've ever seen.
Mm,
It was abysmal. These guys were plodding around, and Derek was throwing some jumping switch kicks, which I think drained all of his stamina.
mm.
And we got to a second round. They were just sort of plodding around, and Derek fell over, accepted being on the ground, and Waldo TKO'd him. He just kind of let it happen.
His guard
And
retention
I think
was
it just,
shocking. Didn't
yeah,
even try.
he didn't even raise a knee. I don't think his hips would have let him try and play close guard. I really
Agreed.
don't think he could have even gotten to a knee shield. I think that's
Mm,
how exhausted he was, and that just goes to show how good those peptides were.
mm.
But I think the heavyweight division of the UFC is a joke at the moment. We've got Talison Teixeira fighting this weekend against Tai Tuivasa, right? Talison Teixeira in his last fight got knocked out by Derek Lewis. After he got knocked out, he was number 15 in the rankings. How does that happen? It was his first fight off the contender series.
There's no
How
depth.
does that happen?
There's no depth, and
There's no depth to the division, but
it's a
yeah,
loss to
the thing
Derek
that the thing, yeah,
Lewis, who's now, he's just gone and got dominated by. I'd consider Waldo Acosta a proper contender because there is no depth in the division. What he's probably one fight away from
yeah,
potentially a title fight off the back of a name like
probably. I
Derek
think if
Lewis.
he,
You give him a Pavlovich and then or you give him a Volkov or someone like
yeah,
that, and suddenly whoever wins that's getting a title shot. Aspinall's probably sitting out for a fair
yeah, I
bit
think.
longer. There's no date on his return. So it's looking like, they might get an interim
Mhm.
title fight going and then yeah, I could see him getting a shot.
Potentially, I think you got to give him someone like Sergey, give him someone like Volkov. Like as you say, he's in the top five. So now you got to start throwing him to the wolves, so to speak. That's like I think Sergey built Cyril Gahn, and
Mm.
he's going to be the one getting the title shot. But the thing that I am happy about is you look at the prelims of this card, and you look at someone like Josh Hockett, who is not the heaviest heavyweight, but he's an athletic heavyweight. He
Mm.
put the pressure on his opponent, and he just made him feel like he did not want to even be in there. I think it was the first middle finger TKO in UFC history. I think it's something that Nate Diaz would have been applauding.
He
It
he's
was
he
an
said he had
absolutely incredible fight.
he said he had cramp in his fingers apparently.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But, I really hope that these new prospects bring some light and life to the division because that's what it needs. You look at some of these other divisions, they're stacked,
Mm,
to the gills. But heavyweight, there's no depth, as we've said.
definitely.
But there's really not much else to say about that
I
performance. It was
agree. I
abysmal.
agree.
I think,
I
yeah,
think
you got
we
to wrap
talk
it up,
about
Derek Lewis.
maybe, Gene Silver and Arnold Allen, and then that might do us for a quick recap when we move on to the next episode of Volkanovski versus Lopez. But yeah, I
Yeah.
honestly, that one for me, obviously Arnold Allen been out of the game for all of 2025 and, a fellow British person. I thought he won. I thought he did everything he needed to do to win. I do think he could have done a little bit more in the grappling. He didn't listen to his coach for us, Zahabi, word for word, and triangle the legs, keep the position, and he allowed Gene Silver, who's the more dangerous of the striker, maybe not the more calculated, but he's definitely got more power, a bit more flair. I thought Arnold Allen did just enough. It was very close. The decision of, I believe it was 29-26, they gave Gene
There was
Silver, one of
a
the
there was a
judges.
30-27.
It was a
There was a
30-27,
30-27 and 29
29,
29-28 with
29-28. Yeah, yeah. Well, that was ridiculous. There's no way it was 30-27. But,
no.
Gene Silver for me in that fight. You know what? I don't think it's lost Allen's stock. Once again, he's losing to another prospect. He can come back. He's just got to tweak a few things. His chin held up against a big striker who was on a mission to come back after Diego Lopez. And I just think,
Yeah.
he made Lopez look, he made Gene Silver look human. Lopez, obviously, the first to do it, but I go into that going, Arnold Allen's a top five contender in that division, which is pretty stacked featherweight. Um, maybe he's dropped slightly. Maybe we're looking, but I still think he's, not towards the bottom end of that top 10. But Gene Silver has got some evolution to do. He's been relying on the big flashy striking. Obviously, he submitted Bryce Mitchell, but to get the knockout, I think he's going to have to really go back and work on how he's going to set things up. He's flashy, he's a fan favorite.
Mm.
It's definitely raised his stock getting him back in the win column. But yeah, what were your thoughts on the fight?
Yeah, look, I think in the moment I did think that Allen won. Upon reflection, I think Allen won round one in my eyes. I think round two was the decider. I think that was a very
Mm.
close round. Gene took over in round three. It
Mm.
was a bit of a war. And you could see Allen kind of hesitate. It looked like something had happened to his hands. He just kind of stopped throwing. And as we know, he has brittle hands and he just wasn't really throwing anything. He started going for jump knees and spinning elbows, but he doesn't have that precision like Gene Silver. I think it's a very impressive win for Gene. As you say, I think Arnold is a top contender. I think he beats a lot of guys in the top of the division. I think he beats, an Aljamain Sterling. I think that's a good fight for him. I think Yair Rodriguez is another name. Maybe that could be the next opponent though for Gene Silver. Maybe at UFC Nocho, that could be a good fight. Obviously, Gene Silver is he had an emotional moment seeing the belt, and that's what he's chasing. So why not
Yeah,
get him one fight closer? I think, as you say, for Allen, stock may have dropped slightly, but he will be a gatekeeper if he can have a better recovery time. I think that he can make his way towards the belt. It
definitely.
would be awesome to see Allen Silver rematch for the strap. That would be an awesome fight in a year and a half's time if we could get to that.
Yeah,
But
no, definitely.
I think yeah, depending on what happens this weekend, that's really going to shape the movement of the division. Especially if, which I don't think will happen, but if Diego Lopez wins, I
Mm,
think that there is a lot of moving parts to that. What happens with Mosvar, who has still been inactive? What do you do with Lerone Murphy? There's a few guys who have not fought in a while. Obviously, we haven't had Murphy fight since I believe it was 314 when DDP and Hamzat fought. So we've got a lot of moving parts to this featherweight division, which I think is again pretty stacked. There are some old guard in there, but overall, fantastic performance from Gene. What a way to bounce back. You know, great performance. I think he was a slow starter in round one, which I think is why he lost.
yep.
As Pierre Dion says, he was just collecting data and just getting that sort of slow start. I think the one fight on the main card we didn't talk about was Natalia Silva and Rose Namajunas, which not much to say there. I think it was a bit of a robbery, to be honest. And
Agreed.
after that performance, I think that she gets laid on top of for 25 minutes by Shevchenko, unfortunately.
I couldn't agree
Rose took
more.
it down with the wrestling. She got held down. Natalia had a good round three. I don't know how you score round one for Natalia. Um, I think Rose won rounds one and two, but unfortunately, women's MMA scored a bit differently,
Yep.
and the control time's not enough. Rose was getting some good shots off, but Natalia did have a dominant round three. You could potentially argue she landed a bit more volume in round one, but there's really not much more to say there.
Agreed.
But yeah,
I reckon we wrap there. I'm looking forward to Volkanovski this weekend. We'll see you in the next episode.
yes.
Sounds
See you
good.
guys then.